Thousands of people in the United States are protesting a government decision to scrap a program protecting nearly 800,000 undocumented migrants from deportation. The group, known as Dreamers, were brought to the country as children, but they gained the right to legally work and study under then-President Barack Obama. As CGTN's Roee Ruttenberg tells us, the move to end the program fulfills a presidential campaign pledge by Donald Trump.
The announcement to suspend the program, known as DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, came on Tuesday, not from the White House, but from the U.S. Justice Department.
To have a lawful system of immigration that serves the national interest, we cannot admit everyone who would like to come here. It's just that simple. That would be an open borders policy, and the American people have rightly rejected that.
The White House says U.S. President Donald Trump made the controversial decision over the weekend after careful consideration, phasing it out in 6 months. Trump urged the U.S. Congress to pass wide-ranging immigration reform by then.
I have a love for these people, and hopefully now Congress will be able to help them and do it properly. And I can tell you, in speaking to members of Congress, they want to be able to do something and do it right.
DACA gave those who came to the U.S. unlawfully as minors the chance to now work legally as adults, a sort of retroactive visa. The Obama-era program saw hundreds of thousands of young, undocumented immigrants coming out of the shadows and registering with the government. Critics say DACA amounted to amnesty, and Trump, the candidate, vowed to get rid of it. On Tuesday, Barack Obama, who introduced DACA 5 years ago through presidential decree, called the move cruel. Breaking his silence on Facebook, the former president wrote, "To target these young people is wrong because they have done nothing wrong. It is self-defeating. Kicking them out won't lower the unemployment rate or lighten anyone's taxes or raise anybody's wages." Outside the White House, immigrants' rights activists gathered to protest the announcement.
I think that the same struggles that white workers in rural America are facing are connected to the struggles that the immigrants are facing in the U.S. And so we need to unite to arrive at a common solution. Otherwise, we're just falling into the trap of fighting each other.
Hundreds of American business leaders have urged President Trump and Congress to keep DACA in place. Dumping it, they say, could cost the economy nearly $500 billion. But the White House says revoking DACA could mean more jobs for unemployed Americans who are in the country legally. As part of the DACA program, so-called Dreamers, the recipients have to reapply every 2 years. Once it expires, no one will be able to renew, leaving the status of many in limbo. U.S. immigration officials say they won't be a priority for deportation, but they note those who break the law will no longer be protected. Roee Ruttenberg, CGTN in Washington.
Let's get you more now on that story, and I'm joined live from our Washington studios by our correspondent Giles Gibson. Giles, what more can you tell us about the protests against Trump's decision to scrap the Dreamers program?
Well, many of these protests really centered up in New York City rather than in Washington. We saw 34 people arrested outside Trump Tower in New York City on Tuesday in the wake of that announcement by the U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions. We also saw, as that report was referencing, some protests outside the White House here in Washington, D.C., as well as protests in Los Angeles on the other side of the country, and finally protests in Chicago, which is significant because Rahm Emanuel, he's the mayor of Chicago, he's been a very strong critic of Donald Trump's immigration policy ever since he took office, really. And Rahm Emanuel also came out to condemn this latest decision to rescind the DACA program as soon as it was announced by Jeff Sessions. So protests really right across the country in the wake of that announcement.
So if we go back slightly, though, there was a similar outcry with Trump's so-called Muslim ban. Can we expect the courts to step in like they did back then?
Well, there's already legal action in the wake of this announcement by the Attorney General, a man called Martin Batalla Vidal. He's actually a DACA participant, and he lives in New York City, and he's been in this country since his parents brought him over as an illegal immigrant several years ago. He's filed a lawsuit in a federal court in New York City against this decision to rescind the DACA program. There's also reports that immigrants' rights groups that they're here in the US, that they're considering adding some of their own legal action to that legal action which has already been filed by Mr. Vidal. But really, legal experts here in the United States are expecting that those legal cases won't have the same sort of success that those cases against the travel ban did, because the president, constitutionally speaking, does have pretty well established powers over immigration in this country in terms of legal precedent.
Well, of course, there are thousands of Africans living in the United States. Just how worried should Africans living there be at this stage?
Well, if there are people who originally came over from Africa and perhaps are from countries in Africa and who are perhaps now on the DACA program, what the US government are saying is that this DACA program will continue renewing permits under the DACA program for the next 6 months. The torch then passes to the US Congress, and they have, over that 6-month period that we've just entered after that announcement on Tuesday, the US Congress has 6 months to try to come up, if there's the political will to actually do it, to try and come up with a replacement for DACA that can then be passed through the US Congress and allow, potentially allow some of these roughly 800,000 dreamers, as they're called, to stay. But if Congress doesn't come up with a long-term solution, then some of these dreamers, these people under this DACA program, could see their legal status in the United States start to expiring around about 2018, and in those cases they would then have to leave the country.
All right, Giles Gibson for us there from Washington.